So I'm in Finland, and the reason why is because I once ran into an English guy who'd moved to Finland, got himself a Finnish wife, had Finnish kids, and the only thing I knew about Finland is that it was the happiest place on earth. So I mentioned to him, oh, is it the happiest place on earth? And he looked at me a bit weird, and then said, no, they're massive alcoholics, massive suicide rate, great depressives, and then started ranting about how they're not even basically Europeans. So I thought I'd come and find out. History begins for the Finnic peoples around 1,000 years BC, in which they would have first arrived in Finland. Right next door, the Finns would have found the Norsemen, who ended up becoming the modern-day Swedish, Danish, and Norwegians. And to the south, you will find the Celts, the Germanic peoples, the Slavs, the Greeks, etc., who have all been here, if not as long as the Norsemen, maybe longer. And the reason being that they all come from the same common tribe, being the Indo-Europeans. The Indo-Europeans are evidenced by the fact that we all have the same common base words, such as mother, water, sister, etc. The real basic words all have the same or similar sounds, evidencing that this all comes from the same language, which means we all have a common ancestor. Whereas the Finns are not Indo-European. They come from the Uralic family tree, from a different common ancestor. And that name, well, hints to their homeland, the original homeland being the Ural Mountains, which divide European Russia from Siberia. Which is why Finland, although being part of the Nordic countries, has a language very different from the rest of them, looking like incomprehensible gobbledygook. I mean, even Icelandic comes from Old Norse, which is Germanic. But for the Finns, no, they are completely foreign to the entire continent. The Swedish would begin to turn up on the coastline, which was largely neglected by the Finns, who stayed inland. And the Swedish began colonising Finland, with the justification being that it was a crusade to Christianise these pagan, filthy Finns. The Swedes would end up bringing Protestantism, but beyond that, Swedish rule of Finland is largely just a bunch of Swedish nonsense. Although all this changed when the Russians ended up siding with Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars in the 1800s and took Finland from Sweden by force. At first, this new management wasn't really a big change, considering that Finland got to keep its autonomy over its own laws, its own army, and even its own language. But the Swedish minority were not as well off as they had once been. So in the 1800s, a bunch of Swedes decided they would found Finnish nationalism. Hell, even the guy who wrote the Finnish national anthem was Swedish, and wrote the lyrics in Swedish. The Bible was translated into Finnish in the 1500s because the Swedes brought Protestantism to Finland, and also the first compilation of Finnish folklore was done in the 1800s by a Swedish person. And all this was done to try and create a sense of unity amongst the Finnish people as a sort of rebellion against Russian rule. But combined with the Russians deciding to try and Russify the population in the late 1800s, all this really did was create a demand amongst the Finns for their own state. Which brings us to Carl Gustaf Mannerheim. Mannerheim was the son of Swedish noblemen and served in the Imperial Russian Army. And Mannerheim just had like a great time in the army. He got to go and fight the Japs in the Russo-Japanese War. He was promoted a bunch and then sent to the Austro-Hungarian front of the First World War. He then got some well-earned leave to head back to the capital in 1917 of St. Petersburg, just in time to watch the entire Russian Empire completely collapse. Finland would declare its independence, and Mannerheim would head home to fight the civil war that immediately brewed between the Finnish whites and the communist Reds. Mannerheim was given control of the army, and despite being outnumbered and outgunned so much that most of his men didn't even have weapons, they won the Civil War. And then Mannerheim ran to be the president, and somehow lost the election. So he said, screw this, I'm retiring from being a national hero, that's cringe, and decided to go and run a coffee shop in the middle of absolute nowhere. In the meantime, Finnish politics got a bit wacky. There was a movement started called the Lapland movement, who were incredibly anti-communist, and decided that they would solve the communist problem. Well, beatings, kidnaps, just whatever they really wanted. I mean, the symbol of this movement is a grug man with a club riding a bear. It's not exactly a complicated movement. In fact, they used to take communists, kidnap them, and dump them on the Finnish-Soviet border to tell them to go back to where they belong. Yeah, not complicated. Just think of Barry Stanton from Twitter. That's them, but Finnish. But eventually, the Soviet Union would return and demand that Finland give up land. Mannerheim was put in charge of the military, and, well, the Winter War, as it's called, between the Soviets and the Finns, well, the Soviets got absolutely crushed. They just got slaughtered in the opening sections of the war, achieving a 6-to-1 KD ratio. But the problem was that the Finns couldn't replace their losses, and the Soviets can always replace their losses. So the Finns had to give up and cede land. And a lot of people were not happy about this result. In fact, a huge amount of Finnish intellectuals had always had this dream for years now of creating a greater Finland that also included the Grug Bear Riding Club from earlier, and they wanted to go all the way back to their ancestral homelands and unite all Uralic peoples under the same state in what they called Greater Finland. And there are some people who took this meme a bit too far and wanted to go all the way back to the homeland of the Ural Mountains, which, may seem like a meme, but if I've learned anything about nationalism, it's that it's all a meme until it's a dream. So when Mustache Man came along and decided he was going to beat up the entire Soviet Union, it seemed somewhat achievable. So Finland joined the Germans in the Second World War, and they decided not to call it the Second World War, but for them it was called the Continuation War, because they were going to get that territory back they had lost in the Winter War. Most of you may know, Mustache Man was not going to win that war, and as soon as the Finns realised that they were going to be on the losing side, they thought they should get themselves out of it. So managed to negotiate a peace with the Soviet Union. This just left one problem, which is that there were a load of German units still in Finland who now needed to be expelled. And at first, the Finns peacefully got the Germans to leave Finland, and then when the Soviet Union started applying pressure and threatening that they might invade Finland if they didn't get them out faster, it was decided that this should be sped up with a little more war, the Lapland War. Mannerheim was made president and regent throughout all of this until peace was finally solid and achieved, and then finally he retired and went back to his little cafe in the middle of nowhere. And until his death, he still kept a portrait of Tsar Nicholas II in his possession, and when people asked him why, he responded, "He was my emperor." After the Second World War, Finland was the only Axis country to basically kind of get away with it. In reality, Finland didn't maintain its independence so much as have to bend to all Soviet pressure at any point, because the risk was very high that the Soviets could just invade, which led to all kinds of restrictions, but most funnily, a guy named Kekkonen became the supreme leader for almost 30 years, because he became the president and then would, remain in power by pulling the Moscow card every time his power was threatened. Now, the Moscow card is him telling everyone that the Soviets only trust me, and that's why I must remain in power, because if you get rid of me, they might invade. But after the Soviet Union collapsed, the Finnish economy would go from selling wood to the Russians to Nokia stonks. The country massively liberalised and even ended up with an all-female government, which, in the English-speaking world, is all anyone really cared about. But during their time in government, the Russian invasion of Ukraine would occur, and the public opinion in Finland of if Finland should join NATO went from -13 to +74. It's not hard to understand why. At which point, without any public debate or vote, Finland decided they would join NATO, just as the Spice Girls would be kicked out of government and replaced with the new right-wing coalition, including the right-wing populist party, the True Finns Party. One of the likely factors being that there's a phrase in Finland, finally in Finland, which means that anything that happens in Western Europe finally ends up happening in Finland like 20 years later, and it seems Finland had decided that they would join the trend of Western European nations of engaging in large amounts of highly foreign immigration, with the groups coming into Finland probably being the most foreign you could think of, to Finnish people, being Iraqis, Afghans, and Somalis, with these groups having an unemployment rate of around 50% compared to a 7% unemployment rate for Finnish people. Getting to Finland affordably was a bit of a pain in the ass, so I ended up sleeping on a bench in the airport in Denmark overnight. But it did give me a chance to learn that Danish is a fake language, their LGBT culture is entirely written in English, and Denmark is also a hot dog country. Arriving in Helsinki, it certainly gives off the appearance of a highly civilized country. You won't find trash everywhere. There's a train straight from the airport to the city centre for only €4, and there's certainly a high-trust society because as you get off the train, there are no ticket barriers to stop you from just walking out. I mean, hell, people even just leave bikes lying around in this city. But being part of the modern Western world, you will be buying that train ticket from a trans black and brown pride flag machine, and arriving in the central train station, there is a massive Ukrainian flag over the train station. Now, in the Anglosphere, support for Ukraine is considered by many to be somewhat of a fad, considering the lack of connections between Ukraine and the English-speaking world, or national interests. But for Finland, being an Eastern European country, yeah, it's not hard to understand why they might be far more supportive of Ukraine, and it being a much more serious issue there, especially given the history with the Soviet Union. So you will find pro-Ukrainian stuff all over the country, even in remote villages. And it's not just the history and the fear of having Russia as a neighbour that causes this. Even to this day, it seems that the Finnish opinion of Russians in general is still incredibly hostile. Now, it does seem to be true that the further north in the country you go, the less people give a crap about this. But down in the south, I decided to start jotting down various opinions I heard in a little travelling notebook, with some of the best being, once a Russian, always a Russian, even if you cook him in butter. I was also told a story about a Finnish child who was told, if you had one wish in the world, what would it be? To which the child responded, that all the Russians would die. That's how it is. But it's kind of funny for me, because being to Russia, I mean, Russians seem to barely ever think about Finland, never mind the Finnish people. It very much reminds me of the English relationship with Scotland and Scottish nationalism, because there are some real hardcore Scottish nationalists who have like an immeasurable hatred of the English, and then you go speak to the English and they kind of forget Scotland even exists. The Central Station in Helsinki was built in the early 1900s in a unique Finnish style, with statues adorning the outside and a beautiful interior. These days housing Starbucks, but also a Finnish brand called Hesburger. It does have its own grand dining hall, but it was closed. So I headed down to a fancy old-world cafe to meet up with a subscriber, but arrived to find it closed. So after sitting around and train spotting some double-decker trains, I headed into Helsinki, walking into the national cult, Moomin. Moomin is a Finnish cartoon series that, being a success, gained a godlike status these days, which means that you will find Moomin merchandise throughout every part of the country, even random gas stations. So I wandered into the main park, which features a statue of the Swedish guy who came up with the Finnish national anthem, along with a statue of the Maiden of Finland, holding a copy of the lyrics written in Swedish. Everyone online recommends this park, which is probably the reason that today it looks nothing like the old photos, and instead is just packed with foreign tourists. In fact, like most modern European cities, it also seems to be the case that a significant amount of the population are also foreigners, with the first people I ran into and had a conversation with being from Somalia, the Congo, and then the other people I ran into who would strike up a conversation on the random were foreign people pretending to be homeless so they could beg for money. The Finns are not so eager to chat. In fact, when you get off the plane, the first thing you are greeted with is the Finnish Nightmare cartoon series, which is essentially a series of cartoons explaining that a Finnish person's nightmare is having to interact with other human beings at any point in their life. So Finns like to keep their distance, and are quite mysterious as a result. So I decided to head into the #1 tourist area of the city, being an old market which is truly beautiful to look at, but daylight robbery in its prices, with €10 for a tiny pancake 16 euros for a reindeer kebab, and 8 euros for a spring roll. But they do sell surströmming, which is fermented herring in a can. Now there's an urban myth that the Finns, or at least some Finnish fishermen, were out catching fish and then it rotted before they could get to the Swedish port to sell it. So they sold it to the Swedes as, oh, it's a delicacy. And the Swedes ever since have been eating rotten fish. Heading outside, there is also a market of orange tents, again selling at dumb prices. I started to wonder who the hell this was all for until I noticed the boats. Most tourists that come to Finland only come to Helsinki because they're on a cruise of, the Baltics or Scandinavia, and they want to hit Helsinki to tick Finland off the list, which makes them perfect prey. But if you cross the tourist bridge to the east past the Russian Tsar Alexander monument, you will find an older side to town, containing an old customs house built when Finland was part of the Russian Empire. It even had a Russian restaurant that had recently closed. And that's not the only Russian influence around here. There is also a Russian Orthodox cathedral, which was also closed. And as you walk past old world apartment blocks, you will see an old Russian barracks that has become the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, right next to the Finnish fleet of icebreakers, with a plaque informing you that they are well needed, since the Baltic Sea regularly freezes over, and proudly Finland has built 60% of all icebreakers on Earth. There's also a monument to Finnish deminers who cleared the sea of sea mines after the Second World War. They just so happened to forget that those mines are Finnish mines that were laid, in support of the Germans. Heading into the Senate Square, you can see even more Russian influence from the Russian neoclassical architecture, back from when the Russian Empire was trying to claim to be the third version of Rome, including a statue of Tsar Alexander II and a stunningly beautiful National Library of Finland, which of course has a Moomin section. Additionally, the university is nearby, and being a European capital, it has the same obsessions as every other European capital's universities, this time being Extinction Rebellion and Palestine, because it's that time of year, which, to be honest, I just find really boring. Not because of the subject matter, but instead the fact that they're all the same. Like, one of the things I really liked about the Taliban's Afghanistan is at least it was really different. They had a really different way of looking at the world. Whereas every European capital might as well be in the same country, considering they all have the same worldview. So I decided to meet up with a local man, this time being Ed Dutton.
Hello, my name's Ed Dutton. I'm an academic. I research evolutionary psychology, and I live in northern Finland. I lived for 19 years, and I have a YouTube channel called The Jolly Heretic, where I look at science and various other interesting things. And I ran into Callum, and he said that Finns are the happiest people in Europe. And I said, well, no, I mean, the suicide rate is very high. That's not really a good measure of happiness. Why don't you come and see the real Finland?
Ed is a very eccentric academic.
I utterly reject all forms of political violence.
As a result, I thought he'd be a jolly good fun guy to hang around with. So I hunted down a place in the city that served Finnish food, which was rye bread and small fried fish, which was very tasty. And on the way home, I decided to get myself a snack, and discovered that Finland also is a hot dog country.
1929 lift, chaps. What floor is it?
Floor number 5.
Floor 5.
Bye-bye.
Alright.
Wait, I need to get up. Fuck. I almost beat you. The next day, the only thing I wanted to do was get the hell out of Helsinki and go and see rural Finland. The My Summer Car kind of Finland.
Hello again.
So I rented a car and headed for the Russian border. Apparently most Finns also think Helsinki is basically the Brighton of Finland, so it's like that. So we're now getting out, we're going to go see the actual Finland, which would be good.
I've never been a fan of Helsinki, and I regard it as an extremely decadent and unpleasant place. And if you're ever on a cruise or whatever, there's this idea, oh, let's pay a bit extra to go and get off at Helsinki and look around. Don't. There is no reason to do so. It's very much a matter of normative determinism. It's hell. It's a hellish place. Last night we had to pay €3.50 to place our bags in the coat rack of a restaurant, which they didn't tell us. They suddenly declared that was the case.
We got chased?
Yeah, we got chased by a woman because we dared to film in a karaoke bar. We took chased down the road saying, "Excuse me, sir, you must delete this footage." And also, I'm going to go to a country, I'm going to go to the capital, tick that off the list. Don't do that in Finland. Helsinki wasn't even the capital till relatively recently anyway, till about 1809 or something. Before that it was Turku, where we're going later. And B, just, no, there's no B, but just don't, I've overreached myself though, no I did, I overreached myself, but no, I think just avoid Helsinki.
I suppose that's a review of Helsinki, which is it'll make you hate Finland, so don't do that. Go to the rest of Finland, which is where we're going to go and now have some fun. Unless you want to see some Russian stuff, in which case, just go to Russia. What are you doing? After complaining enough about Helsinki, we decided to head out to a town called Porvoo. And Porvoo is known for its incredible beauty, coming from the Swedish culture of the town. And the large Swedish minority also means that the language has to be written on all signs in Finnish and Swedish, and the largest political party in this area is the Swedish People's Party. Now, being a Swedish party, of course their vice president is a Somali, whose response to asylum seekers sexually assaulting children is not to blame the culture of the asylum seekers, but instead to say that the problem is the patriarchy. So if you want to say anything, I mean, she's integrated incredibly well. But walking down the riverside of Porvoo, you will find an incredibly famous Finnish painting, painted by a Swede, of course.
They're very liberal with regard to the old nudity, and particularly you'll have a party. People say, okay, let's come around my house, have a party, get completely drunk, and let's all get naked in the sauna together. And that's just a normal evening. That's a normal Friday evening or Saturday evening in Finland. And that's
sometimes mixed sex as well.
It's rare. I mean, among younger people, perhaps, to be a bit edgy, if they might do that. But certainly you do get in swimming pools or whatever, you'll have a steam sauna, and that will be mixed sex. And you can obviously see each other, but it's a bit steamy. And that's how I guess they justify it. Ultimately, they use this idea that, it's deep in our culture. It's this thing that goes back to the Iron Age, whatever, the sauna. It's this deep thing. They use that to justify the fact that basically Finns are just a bit kinky.
You mentioned to me that being an English person coming to Finland, sometimes Finnish people will just be nude.
Yes,
and they don't think it's weird.
Yeah, Finnish people will happily just. I won't mention any, but they'll happily just walk around the house. Sometimes essentially naked, or if you see them naked by accident, that's not, oh my god, how shocking. That's just, oh well. Yeah. They use terms like, oh, it's natural. It's just natural. It's natural. I mean, I have instances of them, for example, they'll go in the sauna in their houses and then go and roll around naked in the snow in the front garden. And you can see them doing it.
Okie dokie. I think this...
I'm not talking necessarily nice nudity either. I'm talking, sort of the full Judith.
Nearby there was also a graveyard for those who died fighting against the Soviets. How do the Finns feel about the continuation
war? They're very proud of it. They're very, very proud of it. They fought. They repelled the Russian Winter War. Then they fought back, got the land back, even though they ultimately lost. They're very, very proud of it. And so they go on about it. They see it as a sign of their national sisu, their national strength. They don't give up and they fight and all this sort of thing.
So I asked my Russian friends, or I told them I'm going to the Finnish-Russian border, it'll be interesting. And they don't hold any ill will against the Finns, but they find it strange that Finns would be so proud of the continuation war. Mm-hmm. Not necessarily because they're fighting back for their territory, but because they had to side with Hitler.
Right. The Finns would see that as a necessary evil.
Okay.
What else could they do? And also, in northern Finland, in Rovaniemi, they hated the Russians. I mean, the Russian soldiers did all kinds of awful things. They would liberate the concentration camps and then rape the people in them, this sort of thing. But the Germans, according to Finns I've spoken to, who remember it, were very reasonable. They'd do things like they'd say, "Okay, we've been ordered to blow up your houses, so please open your windows." So then they would blow up the houses, and then of course the houses wouldn't be destroyed because the windows were open. The blast would go out the window. "We're going to blow up your houses, so please remove all your property from the house so we can blow up your house." And so they didn't want to do this. but they were obeying orders and they had to, so they'd do everything they could to make sure the Finns didn't have a difficult time. So they're in Rovaniemi, particularly in the north, in Lapland, they remember very fondly for that reason.
So obviously that's very different to how the Germans treated everyone else. Is that because the Finns fought with them, so there was a sense of brotherhood or something?
Possibly. I mean, they didn't regard the Finns as white people. The Nazis regarded the Finn and Swedes as white people, and the Finns as sort of... the
Norwegians and Swedes as whites.
The Norwegians and Swedes as whites, but the Swedish-speaking Finns as whites. But the Finns as a kind of Mongolian-type people. And my father told me that's what he was taught at school. That's what we are. They treated the memory as that the Germans did everything to try and not make it as bad as it could be, whereas the Russians were just appalling evil. And there was that time that this old man said on Finnish TV, he was asked, was there anything good about the continuation war? And was anything good about it, anything funny? He goes, yes, we once went sledging on a dead Russian.
Finnish graveyards are also a great place to get a reminder that the Finnish relationship with the swastika is not exactly the same as the British one. In Finland, you'll see the graves proudly adorned with swastikas, and this is not a celebration of the time in which they worked with the Nazis during the Second World War, but rather, long story short, a Finnish guy came back from a trip abroad with the symbol and thought it was really cool, and it was a symbol of good luck, and this was long before the Nazis made it so popular for being known for what they do. So it became part of Finnish life in all sorts of places as a symbol of good luck, and, well, they kept it even after the Second World War, although the presidential flag still has one. Also, if you want to buy some of those flags, I have partnered with Flying Colours now, because I couldn't buy the flags in country, so I found a really high quality place back home that makes flags. In fact, they made the flags for the royal family. So if you'd like a presidential Finnish flag made to a royal standard in quality, well, I've got a code, it gives you a discount, so go and check that out.
And often you find on Finnish graves, it's a pagan thing, you find birds. And in their pagan religion, their pre-Christian religion, when you die, you can sort of fly away as a bird. Because you have three souls. You have your normal soul, you have some other kind of soul, and you have your name soul. And these souls can leave the body. Another thing they have with the christening is they'll keep the baby's name secret until the christening. They'll tell the priest, but they won't tell even the grandparents or anybody. So you talk to Finns in parks and they're with their babies, go, what's your baby's name? He doesn't have a name yet. They won't tell. Sometimes they won't even use the name in front of each other, they'll just say the baby.
But they've picked a name.
Yeah, but it's bad luck because there's this pre-Christian belief in a name soul, and unless you've been christened, an evil spirit can steal your name soul. And they don't have a name. And they'll say to a priest, oh, thank you for giving my child a name, and the name will not be revealed often until the actual moment of the christening.
Because once he's with Christ, he's safe.
Yeah, his name soul is safe.
You'll also find some graves written in the Russian language, but most odd for me was that Swedish graves also mention the job of the person who is dead. So even in death, they still serve. But by now I was getting pretty hungry, and as is my tradition, I decided I would go and head to McDonald's and see what they had to offer from Finland. Get deliciousness. They have microwaves in the store for people who want to heat up their baby food, and rye bread burgers, which are pretty damn good. But the weirdest thing has to be the online menu, and also the translation of donut to coffee bread. It turns out the Finnish language sort of struggles with new words in a way that English doesn't. We just adopt stuff as it comes. So in Finnish, the word computer is translated as knowledge machine. In fact, Ed was speaking to an older Finnish lady who was speaking an older version of Finnish, and she spoke about the railway, which was translated as iron road, and then started talking about the trains, which was translated as iron horse. So the iron horse goes on the iron road. Maybe that Grog logo wasn't that far off. The last thing I wanted to see in Porvoo was a chocolate factory that perked my interest, because they were selling this product. The products are called N-word kisses, and they were called this right up until the 2000s, in which I guess there was a company meeting in which they decided maybe we should change the name. So they changed the name, but kept the art, right up until very recently, in which I guess there was another meeting, and they decided that Americans might dislike the art. You can't buy that packaging today, but you can still buy the product, the N-kisses, which are pretty good. It was also around about this time that I realised I needed to buy stuff to sell to help pay for all this. That's how I pay for it. And, well, I discovered that the Finns also have a card game in which the aim of the game is to not have a certain card. Yeah, that's that. And recently they had another finally in Finland moment where they thought, maybe this ain't the thing to be selling these days. So they've stopped producing them. So I decided to get a whole bunch of I suppose, the last ever issues of these kind of card games. And so if you'd like to help support me, you can subscribe on Subscribestar, and anyone who subscribes for $20 or more a month, DM me and I'll send you a copy of the cards while stocks last. Yeah, we're doing this now. And also, anyone who subscribes for $5 or up, just message me because you're also entitled to get some Zimbabwe dollars and Soviet rubles. For those who don't know, I always buy and sell things from in-country, so I try to find a place that would sell me something that's of interest. And I managed to find a military place that sold pins and medals and such. So I managed to find some medals of, well, the Grug people, with their Grug symbol. Which, yeah, there's also a whole bunch of other pins and stuff, but they're all pretty edgy, because apparently that's what Finland is. Just complete edge land. So if you want to find that stuff, link in the description. Check out the Twitter thread, where I'll have everything posted for sale. And, well, message me on Subscribestar, and I'll get back to you for what's in stock and what you can buy. And for everyone who does subscribe, you're entitled to the rubles and the Zimbabwe dollars. And if you're $20 or up, the card game, whilst stocks last. And to everyone who already has, thank you so much. You make this possible. Getting back to Porvoo, next to the chocolate factory, you'll also find Kmart, a supermarket, in which I went in to see how Finnish people live, and quickly discovered that Finns have a very, very unhealthy relationship with licorice. Not only do they just have endless selections of licorice-flavoured candy, some that used to also have black people on, but also licorice cakes, licorice ice creams, and the state-run alcohol stores have licorice liquor. And yes, you did hear that right. Alcoholism once got such a problem in Finland that the state now runs the alcohol stores for limited hours to try and reduce the amount of alcoholism.
Old-time licorice from 1931. Super pirate licorice.
King Kong licorice.
Goldblum licorice. Salty licorice.
Salty fish licorice.
Strawberry licorice.
Wizard licorice. Cat licorice. Oh, and then they have the pipes. Licorice ice cream.
Licorice ice cream.
Probably like Finland, yeah, no shit. Who the fuck else would be making this?
And there's cheap licorice ice cream. English licorice ice cream. But we don't eat that in England. Buying milk is complicated here, I'll show you. So you've got like sour milk, different kind of sour milk, different kind of sour milk, exclusively there's lactose intolerant milk.
And then flavoured milk, latte milk.
The red one is full fat milk. And then this one here, old style full fat milk, is like milky, super milky milk. Very possibly unpasteurised with tuberculosis included, I've no idea.
But getting back on the road towards the Russian border, we stumbled across the Russian Imperial Fishing Lodge, in which the Tsar would come to have his holidays away from the capital. And of course he didn't do any of the fishing, he had some Finnish guys who would do the fishing for him. Travelling closer to the border, we also ran across the world's largest Finnish flag, which presumably was put up just to remind the Russians, which is pretty cool. And then we looked around and there was this series of flags which are there to celebrate Finland's joining of NATO with all the different flags of the NATO countries. Which is kind of impressive until you see the little plaque that's next to it, which has clearly not been changed, because it used to be a celebration of all of the nations in the European Union and a celebration of the fact that Finland had joined the European Union. In fact, you can even see a gap where Ireland used to be. So now it doesn't really feel like it has any meaning. It feels about as meaningful as changing your profile picture on Facebook. Nearby there is a Finnish military base, with 6-month conscription still being the law in Finland, and just at the entrance there is a German tank adorned with swastikas, and next to it a Finnish military museum, also with its swastikas. Although next door to that you will also find a Finnish museum, but this time dedicated to the United Nations and Finnish operations within the UN. No swastikas this time. And the elderly gentlemen who were outside, who'd served in the UN for Finland, let me play around in their UN armoured vehicle. But finally we arrive near the border of the Russian Federation. So we're right near the Russian-Finnish border. And I found this place right near to it where I thought, oh, we could go get some drinks, maybe something to eat. And it's closed. And you can see here, like, it's bolted. That door is just bolted on. Like, it's all abandoned. Everything here is just abandoned. Like that fish restaurant is gone, that place selling fish is gone. Of course, everything is fish. But you can see, magazine. This is Russian for shop. So this used to be an actual shop. But here you go. Bolted. Completely abandoned. Like, there's definitely a shop in there, but it's gone. Yeah, there's the trolleys. Abandoned trolleys. That's the checkout. So presumably, this place used to be a hustle and bustle of tourists coming over from Russia. And since the border's been closed for what, like a year or so? Been long enough to completely kill this place. Ikra. Used to be an exchange rate. I have a weird capacity for finding ruins. Like, I love how it's just so overgrown. After realising that near the border everything was abandoned and there was no chance we were getting food, we followed the signs for St. Petersburg, or Pietari, and got to the last checkpoint of the border, which has a mall next to it called Tsar, only to very quickly realise that the whole thing was abandoned. So we're finally right at the border, and there's this little cottage industry of selling stuff to the Russians going back and forth, or tourists or whoever else, right? Used to come here. But now the border's closed, no one. These buildings are in the style of St. Petersburg, you know, the Russians' imperial style. And it's called Tsar, the shopping mall, with a Z and then SAR being Tsar, with imperial symbols, presumably to entice Russian tourists. And now it's nothing. Nobody's here.
Last time I experienced a shopping mall like this was Swindon.
So this is such an investment as well, like a really good modern motorway all the way to St. Petersburg for nothing. Yeah, like we're just stopped on a bridge because
Why not?
Well, who's coming?
No one.
I mean, it's just weird to look at. There's no noise, there's nothing. Thankfully there was a Lidl nearby with a whole 3 customers, so we decided to go over there and get some food, at which point I wanted to go and see the border, because in Finland they don't just have a border, they have a border zone, in which the 3 kilometers alongside the border are declared the border zone, in which entry is not permitted unless you have a permit from the Finnish border forces. So we followed the signs until we found all of the signs declaring the border zone and entry not being permitted. Difficulty, because if you call them up to ask for one, as we did, they won't give you one. So how the hell are you meant to get in the border zone? People live in that border zone though, so it's not exactly a real border, so you can just cross it, and once you do, there is a massive NATO flag right on the border. Driving down the zone, eventually we were able to see the poles, white for the Finnish side and red for the Russian side, demarcating physically where the border is. But as we're standing here, or walking around in Finland, I got a message that Vladimir Putin, don't know how this is going to go down, but he did say this. He decided whilst we were out here to issue a statement saying that anyone can come to Russia to escape liberal ideals. If you're being oppressed by liberal ideals, you can claim asylum or permanent residence of 3 months in the Russian Federation. So we're debating, because if we get caught breaking into the border zone, of course that's a crime and dreadful. But if you were doing it to claim asylum in another country, that's protected by the UN, so they couldn't charge you with anything. And you can now claim asylum in Russia to escape liberal ideals. Pretty solid defense, that's all I'm saying. In fact, we did actually call up the border police to ask whether or not we could get a permit to enter the border zone, and no, they're not handing them out at all. At which point we were talking to them and asked, well, what's the crime for being in the border zone, just so we're clear, and the border police didn't know. So after jabbering away in Finnish to each other, one of them grabbed the phone and in English screamed down the phone saying, It is a crime against the Finnish law to cross the border. Do you understand? So we thought best not to, and headed back to Porvoo to go and have a big old sleep in a massive red Finnish cabin. We were going to head into town and have the Finnish version of McDonald's, being Hesburger, but in Porvoo, everything is closed by 8 p.m, or only open 6 hours a day, which seems to be a theme in Finland of just never being open. So we headed over to a pizzeria and got the Porvoo pizza, which is an entire doner kebab and chips on a pizza. The next day we headed out to Turku, which used to be the Finnish capital before the Russian Empire moved it to Helsinki. And shortly after that happened, a Swedish guy set fire to his house, burning down all of Turku, which meant that it's kind of become a forgotten city. Finland is still a statistically Christian country, so I went to check out the cathedral, which is a historic site, which has its own special sign, being an ancient Finnish symbol. They even use it on the road signs. Now, being English, I always assumed that churches were meant to be covered in, well, nothing. They're just white walls. But, of course, this is something that comes from the Protestant Reformation to try and destroy the corruption of the Catholic Church. That only at this point did I realise that the churches used to have lots of Christian paintings and such on the walls that white paint covered up. And it really gives you a sense of what was lost, because here in Turku, they didn't finish the job like they did back in England. Finnish churches also hang ships from the roof when they are port cities for good luck. But once we head into the city of Turku, Ed was overjoyed because he saw that Somali culture had finally come to the city.
No. Are we in Turku or Whitechapel?
At which point we went into the store and Ed purchased some new clothes. And heading out of the store, we then walked along the street and noticed that this store was also, well, opposite a bunch of fetish stores. And going up and checking them out, what was interesting is that the LGBT stuff in Finland was all written in English. So I went in to ask them, why is all of this in English and not in your own language? To which the person running the LGBT store informed me that they don't have words for that stuff in Finnish. The main market is also fairly pretty, and has everything from pig's feet to horse mints. The old market even has a museum section of all the old products. Which was enough of Turku, which I then decided it was time to leave and head to the paradise settlement of Naantali. And once we arrived, we were not disappointed, and greeted with incredibly beautiful architecture. Although being Finland, everything was shut, because it was already past lunchtime. So I wandered into a local church and asked the Finnish priest there as to why Finland is considered such a happy country in all of the happiness index ratings, when the country also has a huge problem with suicide. To which the Finnish priest responded, "We must be the happiest country on earth because all the sad people kill themselves." And with that, we decided to head over to Moomin Land, which is a theme park based on the Moomins. Now, unlike Disneyland, it's only one franchise, so it doesn't have to compete with others, so it gives you an actually authentic feeling of being on, like, the set of where the cartoon is based. At least that's what I was told, because, of course, it being Finland, it was shut. Not having much luck with this whole travelling the country and seeing what it's got to offer thing, I decided, screw it, it's time to go ahead and see the Finnish version of McDonald's, Hesburger. Upon getting the Hesburgers, it's really good, it's goddamn good. What's weird, though, is they have the worst promotional pictures I have ever seen for their hamburgers. And a subscriber of mine said that Turku was the arsehole of Finland. I don't know how true that is, so I thought to find out, I'd book the cheapest place possible. And then, well, that would tell you something, wouldn't it? Staying in the cheapest place in a city. And, well, turns out, certainly not the crummiest. Because where we're staying is on a boat. This is the Finnish police. You're against the Finnish law.
The Finnish law. Crossing the border is against the Finnish law. Do you understand?
Oh, we do actually have towels. And linens, which you put on yourself. How do you feel about being in a cabin on a boat?
I'm very, very concerned about... I don't know you that well. We only met a few days ago. I'm very concerned about what may happen tonight. And I think you should think very carefully.
We shall see. In the morning, we were heading on a ship to the small island of Åland. Now, Åland has its own autonomy because of it being a overwhelmingly Swedish-speaking population, and therefore they're exempt from conscription. The island is demilitarized and has its own little parliament, which isn't just another quirk. You know, like most places have, most countries in the world have this little area that's autonomous and has its own rights. But rather, Åland is really weird, because it was ceded to Russia in the 1800s along with the rest of Finland, but with the population being overwhelmingly Swedish and it being an island, during the Finnish Civil War, Swedish nationalist sentiment was rife, and these people wanted to either declare independence or join Sweden. So the issue was taken to the League of Nations, of all things, which was the version of the United Nations before the Second World War that utterly failed, and everyone just kind of ignores as a complete joke. But the issue of Åland was settled by the League of Nations, with everyone signing an agreement that Åland got its own autonomy and was to be considered almost quasi another country and very neutral. So during the Second World War, for example, merchant shipping from Åland wasn't targeted by either side, even though Finland had joined the Germans in the war. Which means it's probably the only remaining vestige of the League of Nations that people still actually honour, even though that institution is long gone. So, when we got on the ship and docked in Åland, we were waiting for the announcement that it was time to get off the ship and which exit to get off at, so we could see the island. At which point the ship began leaving the dock. When we went to the desk to ask what the heck, we were informed that, well, we do make announcements for those details, but not on the top deck, because reasons. The ship is also only docked for 15 minutes. So if you want to get to Åland, good luck. As for us, we were now prisoners of a pleasure cruise, and the destination was Stockholm, which is not what I wanted. I would love to tell you about the weird and mysterious people of Åland and their uniqueness, but I can't, because we were now stuck on a pleasure cruise to Stockholm, although the boat was overwhelmingly filled with Swedes. And in the year of our Lord 2024, the Swedes were still walking around with N95 masks. The ship also had a transgender bathroom, which twinned with the disabled. Although this did give me a perfect time to sit around and taste all that licorice candy I'd been finding. I don't know what's wrong with them, but let's give it a go. This is not going to be a fun experience. It's still pretty bad though. So this is called guts. Oh. Disgusting. Moving on. A nice jap. I'm going to put a jap in my mouth. Gonna regret this. Genuinely revolting. I don't know what to say. I don't know why Finns love licorice so much. Their version of it is extreme. The idea of putting in chocolate is fucking mental. Ugh. Also got to try some Swedish candy, which is a ball, which has a very funny name. Yeah, Sweden also did that stuff. After being a prisoner on that pleasure cruise, we ended up back at Turku a lot earlier than I expected, which, as a bright side, did give us a chance to head down and find Mannerheim's cafe in the middle of nowhere, which to this day is still being run as a cafe with a portrait of Mannerheim looking over it. Although being a Finnish-run cafe, it's only open 6 hours a day, and when we turned up it was closed. So we begged with the owner to let us in and let us snoop around, and thankfully he allowed us to come in. Next, we headed out to the outskirts of Turku, because I wanted to get a real Finnish experience of Finnish food. And, well, we found a place that's absolutely perfect, this little wood cabin in the middle of nowhere. And when we went in, the food served was meatballs and mashed potato and a sauce, pea soup, which is traditionally served on Thursdays in Finland, and Finnish pancakes, served with cream and jam, which are incredibly thick. And oh my god, was I in love. I seriously loved that food in a way that's hard to explain. And then Ed said to me that he was sort of ranting and raving away and said, "Oh, this is just like when I first came to this country. You know, these people sitting around eating peasant food." Not gonna lie, made me think that the peasant lifestyle might be for me. At which point I thought it was best to cheer up Ed, because we had an 8-hour drive the next day to the north of Finland, so I found a very nice hotel nearby, which was a tuberculosis sanatorium. You don't look so happy about this.
This is a very strange place to stay. So basically we're staying in a place where we know for a fact that lots of people died and, you know, coughed themselves to death. This whole concept is not work of a well mind. This is utterly sterile. It is really like being in a mental hospital.
Yeah.
It's awful.
Like, I knew it was going to be...
There's one perfunctory picture, but otherwise completely bare walls. The kind of mindset that would, let's make a hotel themed around child abuse. let's make a hotel themed around a children's home where there are paedophiles.
The Jimmy Savile Hotel.
Jimmy Savile themed hotel.
You know, it's missing one thing though.
A paedophile?
No. This is the corridor. Go through the wards. You come to the shower room. Well, there's two showers facing each other, so you can both see each other. So yeah, Ed didn't know we were staying. Now that he knows, not sure how keen he is. Are you feeling better, Mr. Dutton? We thought we were the only people mental enough to stay in this, well, almost insane asylum, by the looks of it. Although it turns out that we had some neighbours for the night, which were two Swedish women. Now, the Swedish population are a bit odd to talk to. First thing first, you may have noticed that I've been calling them Swedes rather than Swedish-speaking Finns, which is what they prefer to be called, because they are significantly different from the Swedish in Sweden, the cultural differences. But from an outsider's perspective, I don't think the difference between them and the Finnish population is just a language one. There seems to be a very significant cultural difference as well, so I'm just going to refer to them as Swedes in Finland, rather than Swedish-speaking Finns. The Swedish ladies were from Helsinki, and one of the interesting topics of conversation that came up was the fact that they said that the Swedish population were far more supportive of the immigration into Finland than the Finnish, and they put this down to the fact that the Swedish are better educated and more well-off. Whereas the stereotype about the Finnish is that they're sort of like forest people, and putting this to a Finnish lady that I met, she responded that the stereotype about the Swedish is that they are, quote, little Americans, is what she called them. Meaning that, for example, a Swedish and a Finnish lady might meet, and the Swedish lady will be all smiley and say, oh, we should have lunch sometime. At which point the Finnish person takes that very literally and says, when? Like, well, what time? Where? Where are we going? Whereas for the Swedish person, they're just being polite. And so the Finnish person thinks that that person is a liar and a fake friend and fake happy. Little Americans. I think that just about sums up Finnish-Swedish relations, but for us, the next day we had to drive to Oulu, which was an 8-hour drive to the north of Finland, which meant driving through the dirt roads, and also roads being used as airfields to get all the way to Oulu. At which point we crashed at Ed's house, got drunk, and dined on makkara, which are the sausages you'll find in my summer car, which are a very specific kind of Finnish sausage, which are basically just massive hot dogs, I'll be honest. Also in the basement, I discovered Ed Dutton has a family tree going all the way back to the ancient times. In fact, he's managed to, half-jokingly, get it all the way back to the war god Odin. The next day we headed into Oulu, and Ed wanted to show me a mall that has been built in the centre of the city. And to accommodate the parking needed for the mall, unlike the British, who would spend 1 billion years and lots of money doing nothing, and then finally building one parking space, the Finnish have decided to build a massive dwarven fortress underneath the mall, so they have enough parking for presumably 1,000 years. Now the mall was pretty cool. You can go there and find a Bitcoin vendor, if you'd like to buy Bitcoin. The bookshop is full of all kinds of books about Finnish wars with the Russians, and the Soviet Union, and even the modern war with Ukraine, and the Finnish perspective on that. You can even buy the weird top hats and suits that Finnish people wear when they get a PhD, and they also sold Saturday sweets. But this mall is also partly responsible for the rise of the populist right-wing True Finns party to some respect, it seems. Because before the 2019 elections, the True Finns were like the 6th largest party in the polls, and then the 2019 Oulu grooming scandal broke, and suddenly the True Finns shot up to being the 2nd biggest party in the polls, and coming 2nd in the elections.
So this is my book, which I wrote a few years ago, The Silent Rape Epidemic, How the Finns Were Groomed to Love Their Abusers. This guy, Jonas Locke, who was a sort of, I suppose you'd say far-right, like to the right of True Finns, anti-immigration counsellor and YouTuber, and they weren't, the newspapers were not reporting, they were just reporting there were these men on the trial for rape, and I'm not sure they were reporting foreign background, just these men.
But you could just read the names.
But you can get the names because it's public information. So if there's a trial, that is public information. But the newspapers just choose not to publish it. But he was getting press releases from the courts, which was stating the names, and he realised, hang on, this is gangs. This is a gang of people that have, like in Rotherham, that have been grooming and then sexually abusing young girls. There was protests outside the city hall. There was this Muslim guy that got up trying to defend Islam, and he was shouted down. There was almost a riot. But the Prime Minister came here, standing right in front of him, and trying to whitewash what was happening really, and saying, oh, we'll do something about it, and all this sort of thing. And one of them, a 14-year-old girl, that was one of the girls that had been raped in this incident that was going on, in 2018, 2019, she killed herself because she was so ashamed of what had happened.
After that, I headed out to the cathedral in Oulu, which is not only beautiful from the inside, but also has a monument for those who died for the fatherland, fighting against the Reds during the Civil War. Nearby, you can also find some of the damage left by the Reds during the war against the Soviets, in which the Soviet Union bombed even inland as far as Oulu, and the damage is left there to remind people. In the local cemetery, you will also find a monument to those who died in the wars against the Soviets, and a Soviet monument put up by the Russians for Soviet citizens who died. In fact, one of the oddities in the Oulu cemetery is that you will notice that almost all of the old graves are written in Swedish, as the population used to be almost entirely Swedish. But because of demographic change, the Swedish speakers now make up 0.2% of Oulu. In fact, there are more Arabic speakers than Swedish speakers in this city that was once all Swedish. And after I dropped Ed home, it was time to head even further north, because I wanted to see the mythical homeland of Santa Claus, which is Lapland. If you're going to travel here, do not underestimate how rural life can get in northern Finland. In fact, I almost had the car just break down because I ran out of gas. Almost. In fact, if there wasn't a gas station on the outskirts of the capital, Rovaniemi, I wouldn't have made it. But that countryside does give you a perfect opportunity to see Finns in their natural habitat, out in the woods with their red barns. So apparently this is where Santa Claus lives, somewhere in this town. So you can have a look around, but first, need to find a hotel. Managed to pray to Santa Claus and he gave me enough petrol to get here. So I thought I'd do him the honour of staying at his hotel, the Hotel Santa Claus. I just thought it's funny name, cheap option, okay, but actually it's really bloody nice. There's a saying that wherever you go around the world you'll find an Irish pub. You come to the middle of fucking nowhere in the most northern part of the world where Santa Claus lives, and you'll still find Irish pubs. Now, part of the reason people say that Santa Claus lives in Lapland is because if you head up here, you'll actually find a small theme park, which is Christmas themed, and, well, they have their own Santa Claus and such, just north of the Arctic Circle, and it's incredibly pretty. So if you really wish it could be Christmas every day, this is the place to get a job. Sadly, of course, by the time I arrived, everything was closed, because everything is closed in Finland, but it's probably for the best considering how expensive that place can be as well. So if you want to make a once-in-a-lifetime trip, and you've got a few thousand to burn, on making your wife incredibly happy with infinite fairy lights, that's the place. But if you're cheap like me, you know what's a much better idea? To go around a kid's theme park with a camera at night. Way less weird. On the drive back, I also got to see a wild reindeer, which was a dream come true to finally see Rudolph in the flesh. And his little kid. But at this point, I was getting rather sick, so I checked into a hotel and was going to spend the last couple of days just being sick in a bed. But before I checked in, the receptionist at the hotel insisted, because of my hate of licorice that I was explaining to her, I must try the licorice liquor, which is about as disgusting as it looks. Anyway, that's Finland. Incredibly expensive. Everything is closed. but certainly quite a mythical place, with people doing God knows what out in those woods. And if you like cold and you like Christmas, it's probably heaven on earth for you. As for the Finns, well, it's incredibly early for them to be running their own country after being under the Swedish and Russians for so long. For those who know 40k, it's kind of like watching the Tau. They're incredibly different and isolated, and this makes them seemingly very naive about the rest of the world. But rather charmingly, I'm not sure the Finns even care or want to care about the rest of the world and what it's like. They seem to be just happy with their woods. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe and like and comment. It always helps the channel. And if you'd like to support this work, subscribing on Subscribestar is the best place, and I will send you rubles and Zimbabwe dollars as a thank you. And indeed, I still do read every single comment. Thank you, and goodbye. What do you mean only water, as opposed to what? Piss?